chance. I want you to think back to when you were very young, when you maybe first started school. I want you to think about when you went to kindergarten or first grade in that things, and you had show and tell. You ever remember show and tell? I always loved show and tell because that gave you the one chance to do something different, where you got to maybe go, this is what I brought, this is what I like. Now I can't even get out of my little bag what I want here. But I think about show and tell as a child and what it was, because we had the chance to bring something and say, I want to show you something that means something to me. I always liked things that were small. I don't know about you. I liked things that I could hold in my hand because I could touch them, I could sense them, I could feel them, and it was easy to take around. So for show and tell, you can think, what is it you want to show and tell people about? Well, I always liked cars as a kid. And of course, this is a very small one. Some of you would recognize this out of a movie, possibly. But I liked small things, and so I liked cars. Now, if I was doing show and tell, my family would say, this is what Mark is about. My wife's going to laugh because the last number of Christmases, guess what I get for Christmas? Flashlights. It's sort of like a fetish of some type, you know. I enjoy flashlights. I have big ones, small ones, you know, they fit in my pocket. I have one in each car. I have one in my pocket, usually in case I'm in a building and the lights go out, so I have a way to get out. So that tells you a little bit about me in some ways, that, you know, there are things that we think about and we want to show people and we want to tell people. But oftentimes when we do that, we show and tell only the things that we want. Sometimes we show and tell things that we don't think so much about. We show and tell in our life by the things that people see. And whether we are actively doing it or not, we are showing and telling our life every day to people around us. I've had some good friends who in just the last number of years have passed from this life into eternity. Good friends that I thought passed way too soon. But I look at their life and I'm going, they showed some things in their life, and their story, their life told some things by the very things that they lived. A man by the name of Bob Gilman, who was a trapper and woodsman for years out here in the coastal range and things, for timber companies and things. A godly man who passed way too soon. And I look and I'm going, when we went to a service, we enjoyed and shared and smiled and laughed because of the joy in his life because of Jesus Christ. His life, not just because of the work he did, but his life literally demonstrated to those around him that he loved Jesus Christ. He didn't have to say, look, I'm a Christian. People could see it and hear it in his life. My sister-in-law, who passed away about 4 years ago, same age basically as I am, passed away from health concerns that just came all too soon. And yet her life shined and glowed, and people around her saw and heard as she lived her life. I have a friend now who is pastoring a church in Bend, Oregon, doing a sort of a turnaround church. Some of you might know his name, Terry O'Casey. And he is battling for his life at this point with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And the doctors say that he has but a short time to live. And yet, when I see the lives that he has touched and the people he has touched through the years, his life has shown and told people something that needs to be heard and seen. You know, he's not going to be known by especially the things that he possessed. He is going to be known by the people he touched and how his life touched others along the way. Maybe we'll celebrate when that day comes, all too soon, we're afraid, and have his favorite ice cream, because that's one of the things he loves. But we live our lives, and our life shows to people around us. This morning, if you have a Bible, I want to sort of take you on an adventure through some scriptures that talk about us showing our lives to others and telling our story as it's seen lived each and every day. I'm going to go to Romans chapter 12. I don't have it up on a PowerPoint, so hopefully you have a pew Bible or something. But in Romans chapter 12, the words were written to the church at Rome, and the words speak for themselves. In chapter 12, in verses 1 and 2, it starts out, it says to the church, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." And he goes on in other ways, but down in verse 9, it says, "Love must be sincere, hate what is evil, cling to what is good, be devoted to one another, honor one another above yourselves, never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, and patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you, and bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice, and mourn with those who mourn." And then the word comes in here, it says, live. We think about dying, but we need to think about living. What are we doing each day? It says, live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, one of my favorite verses, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. My question, probably in a real sense to you today, is who are you living for? We live in a world that is changing on a daily basis. We are influenced in so many ways by things around us. Advertisements on TV, the radio, the internet. If you're still a print person like I am, in magazines or newspapers, you read stories. And there is an encouragement in our society to follow and try and keep with the current trends. I found that I'm trending now. You know, have you ever heard that word? And you're going, trending, you know, you have to go on the internet to know what it is. Well, not really, because I have something that at one time was old, but it's trending again. It's become popular by the society that we live in. My children remember seeing when they first looked back in a high school yearbook of mine, and they looked and saw a picture of me and they laughed at me. And it was because of the eyeglasses I was wearing. And they thought my glasses were dorky and sort of nerdy and things. And so, you know, nowadays we wear glasses like this. And back in the day, you know, we wore these. And, you know, I'm looking through these now and I'm going, I don't know if I can see you. But we had glasses like this and we wore them. And what was funny is that these were called birth control glasses for those in the military services many years ago because they didn't think that, you know, it made people look very attractive. But isn't it amazing how things have changed and things cycle around? Now, you know, for a number of years, they came back in style. You've seen some advertisements maybe on some TV ads. It's like, oh, yeah, look at this. This is so cool. And I'm thinking, cool, that was the only thing we could afford. And that's why everybody in the high school yearbook looked like that, because that's what their parents could afford to buy for them for glasses. But we are influenced by the society around us. We are influenced, and people look, and we want to sometimes look like ones around us. I was never trendy with clothing. I always sort of was about 20 years behind, you know. I still wear blue jeans and, you know, and traditional type shoes and things and all those things. But we saw a cultural shift, and we still are seeing. Back in the early 70s, there was a cultural shift away from a lot of the morals and values that were once held for so many years. It was after the hippie movement came along. People were challenging what were norms and held for many generations. Education took on a humanist sort of direction, and do what you want, challenge authority. Like it or not, culture was changing, and many questions were being asked, and many things were being said. There was a Christian theologian back in that time that wrote, his name was Francis Schaeffer, wrote a book challenging the fact that Christianity still was the foundation that we needed to have in our lives. One of his books was titled, How Shall We Then Live? And it gave really solid answers or reasons for people to take and believe in Jesus. The idea is, if Jesus is really Savior of mankind, how should we live? That's a good question. If he really is, how then should we live? So I want you to go back and just read again with me Romans 12, 1 and 2. Look at it and think about it. Let it digest a little bit. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. And then one of those words that says, do not. You remember when somebody says, do not, don't do that? And you're sort of going, well, I can do anything I want to. And yet, when it's written from God's perspective, it has a little different meaning. It says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. How many of you conform? How about the style of your clothes? You realize each generation has its clothing styles, and if you sort of step out of that clothing style, people will go, Doesn't matter if you're older or younger. My wife has gone into stores and she says, I wouldn't wear that because that is, and take your pick. It could be too what? Old, or it could be too young. And so sometimes we conform along the way. I like conformity. I like to make Christmas cookies, and I like to make Christmas press cookies. And you know what I want? I want conformity. I want, when I put the dough in, to squeeze and turn the thing and put it on a cookie sheet, and I want them to look each one alike. But not everything in life is to be conformed. Not everything is meant to be pressed and look alike. We are a unique creation and creatures in Jesus Christ. And it tells us that we should follow Jesus, the one who paid the price for our freedom, that he died to take away my sins, my shame. And if I believe that, I will not be conformed. I will be transformed or live in a different way. Transformation means thinking and acting and looking like Jesus. We talk about we are Christians. That means Christ followers. If we follow somebody, oftentimes we like to imitate them because of what? We found in school that people were in certain preaching classes started to sound like their preaching professors. Now, that was either good or bad. You either had one and you're going, wow, he sounds a lot like, and you're going, oh, well, nowadays I don't know who I would sound like. Hopefully I sound like me, but I've been influenced by others. And so that will have an effect on me. The question is are we influenced by Jesus Christ? If we claim to be Christians, Christ-like, are we being influenced and are we influencing others? Are they seeing our lives in a show and tell way? In 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 11 and 12, if you want to write it down, the words were written by Peter to the church. And it says in 1 Peter 2, 11 and 12, Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles to abstain from sinful desires which wage war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds or works and glorify God on the day he visits. You realize that there should be a difference in our lives. That's what he's saying. Even though people accuse you of doing wrong, they're going to see or hear in your life a whole different thing than what they're accusing you of. And it makes a difference. Chuck Colson, who went through some difficult times in political things many years ago, he also realized there were some cultural things that were going on and changes in the world. He wrote a book with similar title, same type question, but his book was How Now Shall We Live? Same idea. How should we live? What should we live? And what should it look like? I don't know about you, but how many of you, when you read in the Old Testament some of the stories of those people, you're going, man, what's wrong with them? Why didn't they make better choices? Why didn't they do it differently? But have you ever looked back in your life and you're going, oh, man, I wish I would have made a different choice and done something a little differently. It would have worked out better for everybody involved. Well, you think about God's people coming out of captivity. Many of you have read the story. Guess what they did? They made a golden calf. Guess what? They weren't supposed to. They rebelled against God. They wandered for how long in the desert? 40 years. I don't know about you, but I don't have 40 years to wander. Some of us have less time than others. But yet the question is what are we going to do? Joshua was leading a group of people in the wilderness. Moses had a chance to see the promised land, but Joshua got to take the people into the promised land. And he did it with great desire to honor and live for God. I want to read some of his words out of Joshua chapter 24, verses 14 through 18. This is when they were getting ready to literally go in and physically take the land. And there were some choices to be made, just like you and I make choices every day. In Joshua 24, starting in verse 14, it says, Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away your gods that your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourself this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. His great line, though, is this: But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Then it says, Then the people answered, Far be it from us to forsake the Lord to serve other gods. It was the Lord our God himself who brought us and our parents up out of Egypt from the land of slavery and performed those great signs before our eyes. He protected us for our entire journey and among all the nations through which we traveled. And the Lord drove out before us all the nations, including the Amorites who lived in the land. We too will serve the Lord because he is our God. We make choices, don't we? Each and every day of our life. How will we then live? How shall then we live? Is the question that keeps being asked and answered in our lives and other lives over and over again. Another great story in the Old Testament is the story of Daniel, who was a bright young Jewish boy. And the problem was that his country had been overtaken. He, along with others, were chosen because of their youth and their stature and some of their knowledge and things to take and be used and brought up in the pagan government and put in positions of authority or learning and understanding. And so he was taken in captivity, taken away from the people he knew, taken to a different place. He was in a society that was different than what he had been brought up in. But as time passed, Nebuchadnezzar, the king, appointed him as a government official. He became a government bureaucrat. Nowadays, that's not a good thing, sometimes in our society, it seems like, for whatever reason. But you're going, can God work in any situation? Yes, he can. And you look back in that story, and you see that he served well, and he got promoted along the way. But the difficulty was that King Nebuchadnezzar eventually died. The Babylonian Empire came in and dispersed that, but yet they looked at Daniel's life and realized that he had some outstanding qualities about him. And soon he was appointed again as a government official. But there were times when pressures were put on him to do things that were against God. And so Daniel said, that's enough. I'm going to live for my God no matter what I do. And you know what happened to Daniel? Of course, as a child, if you've been in Sunday school, the story was what? Daniel got thrown where? In the lion's den. Nowadays, that would be a restaurant or a bar someplace. But it meant that he was put in a spot that he was going to be literally put to death, or that was expectation. And yet, the one that was king at the time, Darius, liked Daniel. He had seen his life. He had seen and heard how he was living. And he was put on a spot. He says, I'm being pressured into this. I don't want to do this, but by law, I have to do this. And he threw him into the lion's den. The great words, though, were the next morning, it says, when he came. And he cried out in an anguished voice that says, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? And we know the answer to that. Yes. Daniel lived in a pagan society. He was employed in a pagan government. He worked for a pagan king. But yet the one thing that stood out about him was that his boss could see his life and the difference it made. He was showing and telling about that one. We make decisions about life every day. There was a great old hymn that was written years ago. Doesn't get sung very much in churches anymore, but a lot of us who grew up in the church years ago heard the song, Living for Jesus. We might have sung it, and we're going, oh yeah, I remember that. We sang it with great enthusiasm. But yet when we look at the words, are we willing to really do that? It says, living for Jesus, a life that is true, striving to please Him in all that I do, yielding allegiance, glad-hearted and free. This is the pathway of blessing for me. The idea is we choose that lifestyle. We choose to make Him Lord of our life. Living for Jesus who died in my place, bearing on Calvary my sin and disgrace. Such love constrains me to answer His call, follow His leading, and what? Give Him my all. And you and I have that same choice, don't we? Early opponents to Christianity really fought hard to put it out, to wipe it away. And yet, you can't wipe away what is internalized and what is living in somebody's life. How many of you know that Jesus came to die in our place for our sins? And it was a great price to pay. And it gives us great honor then to live for one who has done so much for us. But not everybody liked what Jesus was doing. He battled against people who were definitely opposed to what He was doing. In fact, one of those ones was a man by the name of Saul. He was a good Jew. He knew the law, and he was battling hard against Jesus. But when Jesus came into his life and confronted him, his heart changed. His life changed. And he became one of the greatest biblical authors and missionaries of his day. And he wrote to the churches, and he encouraged them to live in a way that would honor God. In Colossians chapter 1, as he was writing to them, going through and remembering all their faithfulness and the things that they were doing, and verse 9, it says, for this reason, since the day we heard about you, we have not stopped praying for you. Remember this morning how you're praying for those on your list and the missionaries and the ones? It says, He had not stopped praying for you. We continually ask God to fill you with the knowledge of His will through all the wisdom and understanding that the Spirit gives, so that you may live a life worthy of the Lord and please Him in every way. His goal was that people would not only just hear it, but they would what? Do it. It would show and tell in their lives. Live that life that is worthy of the Lord and please Him in every way, bearing fruit in every good work, growing in the knowledge of the Lord. In another letter he wrote to the Thessalonica church in 1 Thessalonians 1, verses 2 and 3, he again says, we always thank God for all of you, continually mention you in our prayers. We remember before our God and Father your work produced by faith, your labor prompted by love, and endurance, inspired by the hope in our Lord Jesus Christ. Their work, their labor, their endurance, he remembered it. He could see it, and so could other people see it. Sometimes wonder what people see when they see us in the workforce. I've been bivocational for a long time in ministry, sometimes by choice, sometimes not by choice, because of the churches that we could work in if we helped support ourselves beyond what the church could do. And so I've worked in some situations where I've worked with people that maybe weren't the most pleasant in life, and maybe they thought the same for me. I think about one of the great stories of work people produced by Disney in one of their original movies. It was Snow White and the what? Seven Dwarfs. The story originally was a children's story. It didn't have names or didn't name the people in the story, but Disney did. You remember the names? Doc, Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, Dopey, Bashful, and Sneezy. I think I've worked with some of those. I don't know about you. But they were given names, and it sort of described them and portrayed them by the names that they were given. What would people say about you? Oh, which name would you pick? Or what name would others pick for you if asked about you? Are we showing and telling Jesus Christ in an everyday way and understanding and learning from Him of the things that we should do in life? I think oftentimes we learn things at different ages. We learn things in life in different ways. And hopefully some of the things we learned when we were young still stick with us. Hopefully some of the things we're learning now stick with us later. If you're aging like I am, you're going, now what was that I was here for? But we do remember some things. Robert Fulghum wrote in a book that I loved and enjoyed many years ago, a short little thing. It says, all I really needed to know I learned in kindergarten. Oh, yeah. Sometimes we look back and we're going, yeah, I learned some things. He says, all I really needed to know I learned in kindergarten about how to live and what to do and how I learned these things in kindergarten. Wisdom was not at the top of the graduate school mountain. Some of us went to graduate school and we're going, yep, that cost a lot. And hopefully we learned some things in that process. But he says, but they're in that sandpile at Sunday school. These are the things that I learned. Share everything. Play fair. Don't hit people. Put things back where you found them. Clean up your own mess. Don't take things that aren't yours. Say you're sorry when you hurt somebody. Wash your hands before you eat. You still hear some of those? Flush. Warm cookies and cold milk are good for you. Live a balanced life. Learn some and think some and draw some and paint and sing and dance and play and work every day some. Take a nap every afternoon. Yes! And when you go out into the world, watch out for traffic. Hold hands and stick together. Be aware of wonder. Remember the little seed in the styrofoam cup. The roots go down and the plant goes up. And nobody knows how or why, but we are all like that, he says. Goldfish and hamsters and white mice and even the little seeds in the styrofoam cup, they all die. And so do we. And then remember Dick and Jane's books. And the first word you really learned, the biggest word of all, look. Everything you need to know is there somewhere. The golden rule and basic sanitation, ecology and politics, he writes, and equality and sane living. Take any of those and extrapolate it into your sophisticated adult terms and apply it to your own family or your work or your government or the world, and it holds true and clear and firm. Think what a better world, he says, it would be if all the whole world had cookies and milk about 3 o'clock every afternoon, and then laid down with our blankies for a nap. Or if all our governments had a basic policy to always put things back where they found them and to clean up their own mess. And he says, and it is still true, no matter how old you are, when you go out into the world, it is best to hold hands and to stick together. You know, I don't know, I've learned a lot since kindergarten, but some things are still really good to live by. Living a life in balance is one of the better things. Offer our bodies as living sacrifices. Don't conform to the world. We need to live by the pattern that God has set out. In 1 Corinthians, another letter to a church that was living in troubled times, in 1 Corinthians 10, it says this in verse 23, I have the right to do anything. Sounds like the world we live in. Do whatever you want. But he says, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but not everything is what? Constructive. No one should seek their own good, but for the good of others. Boy, he goes on and he talks about how in so many ways. Verse 31, it says, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, doesn't sound like we compartmentalized our world at that point, does it? Sounds like everything is included. People are looking at all that we do. So he says, so whether you eat or drink, whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Do not cause anyone to stumble, whether Jews or Greeks or the church of God, even as I try to please everyone in every way. For I am not seeking my own good, but the good of many, so that they may be saved. What are we living for? Or who are we living for? Sometimes we forget in the world that we live in that we need to take and think about it. People are watching. Show and tell. When you walk out of your door, people are seeing something. You know when your neighbors walk out the door and you're looking at them, do you have a thought in your mind already? I wonder what they're doing. Or you have a comment. Oh, they're sort of a grouchy neighbor. Oh, or boy, they mow their lawn a lot. Or maybe they don't mow their yard at all. But we look at people and people look at us. The question is what are they seeing? What are we showing to the world on our daily basis? We need to live in balance. We need to live in a sense of not legalism or not license, but we need to live in balance to show and tell Jesus Christ in our life. The gospel writer of Luke said this in Luke 2:52, and he says, and Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and men. Sounds like a pretty good pattern to me. He grew in practical knowledge. He grew in body. I'm growing in body. I'm trying not to grow in body. But part of that is what happens. He says, grow in favor with God in your spiritual life. Grow in favor with mankind, how we live and how we act towards others. Have I put God in the center of my life? Are we looking for the words, well done, good and faithful servant? I think about my friend Terry, whose life likely is going to be cut much shorter than he wanted. He's 2 years younger than I am. In a preacher study group that we have, sometimes we talk about, being the old man, and they always said he was the old man and somebody else was, and I look at him going, chronologically, I'm afraid I've got you guys beat. But the question is, no matter what our age, what are we doing in our life that is showing to the world around us that Jesus would say to us when our time is finished on the earth, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your heavenly Father, or that kingdom. Paul's chains advanced the gospel. He preach Christ. And he says, my chains have done many things. People have seen where I've lived, how I've spoke, what I've done. But one of the last things that he said in Philippians, in the letter to the church there, in verse 20 of one of the chapters, he says, I eagerly expect that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. You know, he understood that there's only one way out of this world. Sometimes I don't want to look at that. It's like, don't tell me that that's coming. But he looked at it with the sense that no matter what happens to me, he said, whether by life or by death, for to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I'm going to go on living in the body, it will mean fruitful labor for me. Yet what shall I choose? I do not know. I am torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is far better. That's our hope for eternity, isn't it? But it is more necessary for you that I remain in the body. You know, he would for a time, so he could be a blessing to others. For you and I, in the time that we have left, what's our purpose or our hope? Are we going to be a blessing for others, that Christ may be seen? He says, convinced of this, I know that I will remain, and I will continue with all of you for your progress and joy in the faith, so that through my being with you again, your boasting in Christ Jesus will abound on account of me. What were people saying about him? He lived a life that honored God. Show and tell. Show and tell. Live for Jesus. Show the world each and every day that your life in Jesus is your joy and your hope. May God bless you as you choose to live for Jesus Christ.
In the morning when I